Week 3 is in the books. Everybody is overreacting, which means there are some great places to take advantage of the waiver wire, pick our spots, and absolutely dominate coming into week 4 of fantasy football while everybody else is sitting on their hands and not making league-winning moves. And this is exactly what I'm going to give you guys in this video. If you're new, make sure to subscribe to get this every single week. But this is the time of year, again, when we need to make these moves. And our very first ad of this week is going to be Woody Marks. We need to go through and get our handcuff running backs at this point in the year, guys, because we're dealing with injuries and bye weeks. He didn't have a great fantasy football week as far as points scored, but when you look at the underlying numbers, which is what you want to do when you're making these ads, 7 total touches compared to Nick Chubb at 12. The Texans, though, heavily condensed their running back situation. Dameon Pierce, Dare Ogunbowale were both healthy scratches versus the Jaguars last week, and this team had Woody Marks playing 30 snaps compared to Nick Chubb at 33, while running 19 routes in the backfield compared to Nick Chubb at 17. This is an extremely bright green flag for him in the long term because he's averaging more yards per carry and more receiving production than Nick Chubb so far this year. There is a 100% chance he can turn into an every down back for this offense. Now, yes, the offensive line isn't great, but if you can get that role, it is that much better. And you look at the season splits, Woody Marks last week, 10 total snaps in the 2-minute drill out of the 11 that there was. That is his role. He got that last week. And you look at the third down splits, it was about even. Everything else was about even the early down stuff. When you look at the goal line, that was all Nick Chubb, and it's understandable. You're not going to give a rookie running back in his third ever start that much goal line opportunities. But they come in now in week 4 against a matchup with the Titans that are a complete run funnel of a defense. They were top 5 in fantasy points allowed to running backs last year. They are this year as well. And yards per carry. So very efficient matchup for these running backs. Now, does that mean we throw him into our starting lineup in week 4? It does not, but I promise you, if you don't get him off the waiver wire this week, it is going to be that much harder to do it in weeks to come. So if you want to stay ahead of the waiver wire, make sure, again, guys, you hit the like button on this video and you subscribe if you haven't already, because Torrey Horton is another guy that we need to be adding and should not be rostered in under 20% of leagues. 11.2 points in week 2. 18.2 points in week 3 against the Saints. We just saw he's reaching new highs there. So you look at the splits between these guys. All 3 of their wide receivers, JSN, Cooper Kupp, and him, were at 16 routes run. Now, to be fair, he didn't have a great week, only 4 targets on those 16 routes, but all of these wide receivers played an even amount of routes here, and they're all technically, I guess, wide receiver ones in that aspect, but 16 routes is not a lot. Most wide receivers in offenses typically run 32-ish, 35-ish routes, so if you just double those routes run, he would have seen 8 targets comparatively, which would have been a lot better of a week. Now, this game was a blowout, so he probably got an increased number of snaps because of that, but his role will continue to grow with his opportunities, and his total snap share is only going to go up. I do not personally trust a 32-year-old Cooper Kupp to stay healthy and or fantasy relevant all season long. They have a very positive matchup coming up, as well as some very good ones in the future weeks against the Cardinals in week 4, followed by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Jaguars, and the Texans. All grades coming in until their bye week in week 8. And we know that rookies typically get more involved after the bye weeks. That's even more of a reason you should add Torrey Horton right now. Obviously, he had that great kick return for a touchdown as well. So the upside is there. Speaking of upside, though, Trey Tucker, now just to set the scene, he's not going to score 40 points and 3 touchdowns every week. But last week, the numbers underlying from those fantasy points were very, very inviting. Trey Tucker played 94% of the snaps, ran 33 routes, leading to his 9 targets and 145 yards in a game script that was playing from behind, pass heavy against the Commanders. If you look at the snap split, it was clearly Jacoby Myers and it was clearly Trey Tucker as the number 1 and 2 wide receivers and everybody else below him. Everybody else was nowhere near these guys in the 2 wide receiver sets. They were obviously playing all of them. Now, last week, Tucker, again, had 8 targets, playing over 90% of the snaps. He was the Z wide receiver, though. This role is not a complete fluke. Like, he's been playing this Z role, this wide receiver 2 role, all season long, and it didn't change. He just so happened to have a good week and a lot of looks in the red zone and those deep passes. And the way that this offense is looking, Geno Smith is going to have to continue his very high pass volume. They're already top 10 in that now. And they come into a matchup against the Bears here, very friendly to wide receiver fantasy points allowed. And you should also go through, if you need to stream a tight end, to get Hunter Henry. We have to understand, again, he always has a few monster games every season. Last week against the Steelers, he put up 29 fantasy points, catching 8 of his 11 targets for 90 yards and 2 touchdowns. This isn't going to continue. But again, the usage suggests this is a guy we need to add. He was on the field for 60 of the total 74 snaps, running the most routes on the team. Yes, more than all of these wide receivers. He was number one in that, and it allowed him to lead the team in target share. Surprisingly, maybe surprisingly to me, not you, Drake May has actually been very good in his pass volume and his efficiency on those attempts. He's top 5 in completion percentage and passer rating. This team is 9th in passing attempts and has a pretty good schedule coming up with the Panthers, the Bills, and the Saints in their next 3. Hunter Henry can be started in those matchups. And last year, you just look at his numbers. He was top 10 in red zone targets, top 10 in total targets and yards, and had a 20.6% team target share. You look at the Panthers in week 4, they've allowed over 11 fantasy points per game on average to opposing tight ends. Great plug-and-play option there. But Parker Washington, he is also an interesting add coming into week 4 with the mess that is the Jaguars wide receiver room. Brian Thomas is not looking like Brian Thomas right now. Travis Hunter has played more defensive snaps than offense for 2 straight weeks. And Dyami Brown, leaving this game with a shoulder injury. We don't know how long he's going to be out for, but that put Parker Washington into this slot here. Allowed him to lead the team in targets with 11, running more routes than Travis Hunter did, 50 of the total 70 offensive snaps. Washington actually filled in 1-for-1 with this Dyami Brown role, which might not seem that crazy, but it has turned out to be pretty valuable. Depending again on how serious this Dyami Brown injury is, will tell you how severe and how urgent of an add Washington is going to be. But whatever amount of weeks that he's out, he might be a valuable start because, again, this team is 6th in passing attempts this year. We've seen him be viable in previous years as one of these starter wide receivers in this role. But again, all of these injuries, guys, are making people like Jalen Tolbert a top waiver wire add. CeeDee Lamb is dealing with a high ankle sprain. Those typically take a decent amount of time to come back from, depending on the severity of it. We don't know how long he'll be out for. I expect at least 1 to 2 weeks. You look at this offense and what they fell back on last week after he did get injured. Tolbert was that, and he was dominating. Now, yes, only 7.4 fantasy points. Again, guys, we can't look at fantasy points and just make that the above all fantasy stat that makes people viable, because you look at the underlying numbers here. Tolbert took over that Z wide receiver role 1-to-1 of what CeeDee Lamb was. So he took over, I guess, technically his role. And he didn't play a lot of snaps in the slot. That was all Kevontae Turpin. He doesn't need to do that, though, to be fantasy football viable. Again, monitor Lamb's injury. If he is out, Tolbert's going to be fine. He was playing in every single 2 wide receiver set. George Pickens and Jake Ferguson definitely take the majority of this boost with him being out. He's still a guy on a team that is 1st in passing attempts, and in the beginning of the season was projected to be 2nd in passing attempts. So you know this team is going to stay pass heavy, which is great for Jalen Tolbert. Some other top adds here, guys, depending on what league size you're in. Troy Franklin is a really, really good one. The 2nd most routes on the team. I know he didn't have a good fantasy point day as far as points go. He's still being used a ton. Trey Benson, guys, if he's not rostered already, by far the number 1 ad for you guys. Christian Kirk, again, is another really good one. The number 2 wide receiver. He just came back from his injury. Now he's instantly that role. He finished with 8 targets on 33 routes, playing right up there with Nico Collins. Sterling Shepard is another good one, depending on how long Mike Evans is going to be out for with his hamstring injury. You can also look to get Cole Kmet, not a very strong one, but if Colston Loveland is out, that could be a value for you. Kyle Monangai as well. He didn't play a ton of snaps. It was a bit of a blowout last week, which allowed him to play more than usual, but he's a great handcuff. Again, their matchups are coming up and their bye weeks are coming up. That could allow him to see more snaps behind him. And some defenses, guys, we can go through and add. Number 1 is going to be the Detroit Lions, who get a matchup here against the Browns. It's their turn. Defenses playing against the Browns this year have averaged over 10 fantasy football points per game. You can also get the Chargers, who get one against the Giants. Their offensive line is not great. They can take advantage of that, and they have been able to take advantage of matchups against really, really bad offenses. They've done better in those. Again, the Patriots are also decent if they can get Christian Gonzalez back. They get one against the Panthers. You can also get the Texans getting the Titans in week 4. They are a run funnel of a defense. Of an offense is not great either. So this is a great spot for them as well. But that is going to finish out this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in the next one coming